Okay, this is the last video for PPFs, and I want to use the PPF to show two things. So first thing, I want to use PPF to show graphically something about economic growth. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that first. Uh, it's not the best example, but let's just go ahead and stick with the example we've been using because we've been using it. Okay, and so it's familiar. So we got again, we have our clothing, and we have our food. My shape is going to change a little bit. I'm not worried about the numbers really anymore. And so let's suppose, oops, right now, this is what our curve look like. Okay, this is our PPF. And then let's suppose something happens to our country. So we get an immigration of many working age people. Okay, so they're people who are like 20s to 50s. Okay, or yeah, you get the idea. So working age people. So they're in the prime working age. So they're not still in school, and there's not very many retirees among them. Right, we get a big one of this. Okay, so and then in this group, what's going to happen to our PPF? And they're kind of general skilled workers. They're not specialized in any way. So yeah, you're probably thinking, and you're probably right. You're probably thinking, well, our PPF is going to go out, and it's going to go out everywhere. The whole thing is going out. So our PPF would go out, and this would be show economic growth in terms of GDP. Our total production would probably be more. We would expect to be more. Now, just to make a quick note, so we would expect more total production. Our frontier would get out, but we don't know we don't know about per person. So per person, it would depend whether these workers make some change to the economy, or whether they're more productive than your average existing one, and whether they can have some complementarities. We can't say about that, but it would be pretty clear we would expect to get more total production. So notice something. We haven't labeled a point we'd choose. So remember, what this frontier shows us what's efficient, but it can't in terms of production, but it can't tell us which one to choose. So the society has to decide whether they want more of one or more of the other, or some mix in between, although they would usually decide something in between. So this is kind of a balanced growth, we could call this. Okay, so we can call this something kind of like balanced growth, because both sectors are growing. And then we can also show another concept about growth using this. So the other concept about growth we can show would be something more specific. So here's our food, here's our clothing, like this to start with, and it looks exactly the same. And now, in this case, we're going to have something different happening than above. So we're going to get, this one is going to be, we get tech, there's a new technology in farming. So we got a new seeds for farming that help all kinds of crops to grow better or be more resistant to diseases or something like that. None of it has anything to do with clothing. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be a one-sided deal. Okay, so it's just going to affect the food and not the clothing. Okay, so this one in this case is sector-specific growth, right? Because one sector is growing. So that's kind of a little application of this. We can use this to illustrate those ideas. And so economists do that a lot. You'll see that throughout the course. We like to have pictures to illustrate concepts. So it makes it a little bit more clear. So this is one way you could use this. Just to add one final thing, our example was food and clothing, but we could do lots of examples. Okay. So lots of examples we could illustrate with this. So a common one, I think you have a similar related homework problem about this. This is a kind of classic one, is this idea of social goods or goods for consumers and national defense. Okay, so this one is often called the guns butter, right? I'm just going to call it, well, we got national defense here, and on this side we have maybe something like education. Okay, so you have a similar problem in your homework related to that. So that's often a trade-off we might illustrate. So again, remember, this only shows what's efficient. It can't tell us what to choose. So it doesn't prescribe that, oh, we should have more national defense, more education. That is an opinion kind of piece, something which we would call like a normative analysis. You're telling what should be. The economists would just tell you what the positive analysis is, which is namely that all the points along this curve are efficient, and the society can decide for themselves which one they want to choose. Okay, so all of those are efficient. Last one, just to show real quick. well, maybe you've taken 2 hard classes. So let's imagine you're taking maybe a hard econ class, and you're also taking a hard math class, okay, in the same semester. So let's suppose then you have your trade-off. Well, if you only studied for your econ class, maybe you could get an A+, and if you only studied for your math class, maybe you could get A+, but you would get an F in the other one. And then let's say maybe you decide to do something in the middle, so you decide to go for maybe you go for a B+ in each. Okay, so you decide to go for a B+ in each rather than going for an A+ in one and an F in the other. So you can illustrate all kinds of trade-offs on this. Go ahead and try to think of your own example, and then I'll put something into the discussion about that. Okay, one last thing is I want to see, well, what can we tell by comparing PPFs from 2 different countries? Okay, so if we want to compare PPFs, we're going to be able to tell something about what we would expect the patterns of trade to be if we do this. Okay, so let's compare the PPF for China with the PPF for Ethiopia. Okay, so we're going to compare these two. And we're going to have two goods just for simplicity. So one of our goods is going to be coffee. I'm not sure if you know this, but yeah, they do grow coffee in China, although not tons of coffee, and not in the whole country. And we also have our second good is smartphones. So you're probably aware lots and lots of smartphones are made in China. So this is a PPF. It actually shows, we're not going to show what they do make, we're just going to show what they're capable of making. So you definitely can make smartphones in Ethiopia, although without all the industry networks and the local manufacturers of all the components, it probably wouldn't be very easy, probably pretty expensive to do that. So anyways, so let's go ahead and show our smartphones versus our coffee. So it looks something like this. Okay, let's say it looks something like this. And so in China, it can produce smartphones really well, coffee not so much. Now, it's a little unrealistic what we're drawing here, because we're kind of assuming that to make more coffee, they'd have to do less smartphones, as if that's all they're doing. But we can still illustrate the simple idea, because our models are not that realistic all the time. But they do point out key things, is that China is very good at making smartphones, and coffee they're okay at. They're not super good at making coffee. Okay, so Ethiopia, smartphones would probably be pretty expensive to make, and coffee is very easy. Coffee grows very well there. It's like one of the prime places in the world for this. So we can see these two sides. Well, you can tell by just comparing them side by side that the China PPF is really steep, and the Ethiopia PPF is really flat. So you would expect, in this case, if there was some kind of trade pattern, this would lead you to expect that the Ethiopia would be selling coffee to China, and China would be selling smartphones to Ethiopia. And so this is a concept that if you have a lower opportunity cost in something, you have a lower opportunity cost in a good, okay, then you have something called comparative advantage.